The boat disintegrated before Sarah Carter's finger touched the trigger. 1 second it was there, low in the water, engine gurgling through flooded reeds, cargo stacked under blue tarp. The next second it was fire and splinters, and a sound like the sky cracking open. Carter didn't move, didn't breathe. She pressed her eye back to the scope, swept left, swept right. Somewhere in this maze of half-submerged rooftops and drowned palm trees, another shooter had just beaten her to a kill she'd spent 6 hours setting up. Her thermal flickered. A heat signature, not on the water, elevated, northwest, gone in 2 seconds. The radio crackled. Donovan's voice, low and tight. "Falcon, that wasn't a drone strike." "I know," she whispered. "Someone else is out here." Silence on the line. Then, "Sarah, listen to me carefully. You're not hunting smugglers anymore." Another pause, longer this time. "You're sitting on top of a covert war between Israel and Iran, and somebody just fired the opening shot." The Delta didn't sleep. It breathed. Sarah Carter had been watching it breathe for 4 hours. The slow exhale of fog lifting off black water. The twitch of reeds in currents that moved regardless of wind. The occasional thud of something heavy shifting beneath the surface. She didn't know if it was debris or a body. At 0400 in the Shat al-Arab corridor, 20 kilometers from the Iranian border, it could have been either. She was 9 meters up, wedged into the skeleton of a collapsed telecommunications tower that leaned over a half-submerged village like a drunk forgetting to fall. The water below her was chest-deep between the buildings. She could smell it, stagnant and organic, carrying the rot of wood pulp and diesel, and something older she couldn't name. The scope of her Mark 22 was already fighting her. The humidity was catastrophic. She'd wiped the objective lens 3 times in the past hour. Each time it fogged again within minutes. This terrain hates precision work, she thought. She shifted her body 2 inches left. The tower groaned. She froze, listening, then relaxed. The sound had been absorbed immediately, swallowed by water, by fog, by the ambient noise of 1,000 insects that didn't care about the war happening above them. Carter ran her fingers along the stock, checked her dope card by touch. She'd recalculated twice for the humidity, once more for the vapor density above the waterline. Bullets didn't travel clean over flooded terrain. The air was different down here, thicker, layered, prone to creating false pockets that could pull a round off its path by half a minute of angle at distance. Half a minute of angle at 800 meters was the difference between a confirmed kill and a man who walked back to his boat wondering why the water had splashed funny. She needed everything perfect. The village below had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the last major flood had pushed the waterline into the second story of every building. What remained above the surface, rooftops, the upper courses of mud brick walls, the occasional second-floor balcony half-rotted, had become infrastructure for people who preferred not to use roads. Smugglers, couriers, men moving things that couldn't survive a checkpoint. Carter had spent an hour before darkness memorizing the roofscape. She'd built a mental map of every gap, every load-bearing section, every surface that would crumble if she needed to move fast. The key to Delta work wasn't shooting. It was understanding the ground you stood on, or the ground that used to be there before the water took it. She'd counted 11 rooftops she could use as stepping stones heading northwest if she needed to relocate. She'd counted 4 that would not hold her weight. She knew the difference by color. The pale sections where moisture had wicked through the mud brick and crystallized on the surface were the ones that were already hollow underneath. The insects were the thing that surprised people who hadn't worked this terrain. City operators expected silence at night, or the silence of desert, the clean, empty quiet of a world without cover. The Delta was the opposite. It was noise, layered, constant, biological noise that pressed against your concentration like a physical weight. Crickets, frogs, the hum of mosquitoes she'd stopped swatting because motion drew attention and attention got you killed. The sounds layered over each other until they became a kind of white noise. And what you had to learn, what took real time to learn, was how to hear the absence within it. The moment when a column of frogs went silent because something large had moved nearby. The shift in insect pitch that meant a human body had disturbed the air 20 meters away. Donovan had taught her that, not in a briefing room, on an exercise 2 years ago when she'd missed a contact because she was focused on her optic and not on the fact that the crickets had stopped for 6 seconds. "You're not a scope," he'd told her afterward. "The scope is just a tool. You're the sensor, all of you." She kept that with her on every deployment. Tonight it sat behind her left ear like a second set of eyes, monitoring the soundscape while her right eye worked the scope. Carter exhaled slowly, studied the roofline to the east, where the channel widened and boats could move faster without grounding on submerged obstacles. That was the route. The intelligence package had been specific. 2 boats, possibly 3, moving after midnight, carrying drone relay components and missile guidance hardware sourced from Iranian defense contractors and bound for proxy militias operating in the marshlands north of Basra. She'd been assigned to interdict. Observe, confirm, eliminate if possible, extract intel from the cargo. Simple, clean, Delta work. The fog shifted. Something moved on the water to the south. Carter pressed her eye to the scope and waited. 48 hours earlier. Forward Operating Base Taji, Briefing Room C. The satellite imagery was 8 days old, which in the Delta meant it was nearly useless. The flood cycles moved too fast. What had been a navigable channel last week was a mudflat today, and what looked like solid ground from orbit was often 2 feet of water sitting on top of silt. Carter had pointed this out. The intelligence officer, a captain named Holt, who had the particular confidence of a man who had never operated outside of air conditioning, had acknowledged the limitation with a nod and moved on. 2 shipments confirmed via SIGINT intercept. Holt advanced the slide. First boat carries drone relay hardware, commercial grade but modified. The guidance chips are the issue. They're dual-use components that can be adapted for precision strike systems. Adapted how? Carter asked. That's above your clearance, Lieutenant. She'd looked at Master Sergeant Donovan across the table. He'd been sitting in the back row, arms folded, saying nothing. He was technically retired, technically a private contractor liaison attached to the agency office. But he had clearances she'd never be read into, and when he showed up at a briefing, it meant the briefing was missing something. He'd caught her look and given her the smallest possible shake of his head. Not now. Primary objective, Holt continued, is interdiction of both shipments before they reach the northern handoff point. Secondary objective is extraction of any hardware for technical exploitation. You'll have a 12-hour operational window beginning at 2200 local. What's the political situation with the Israeli activity in the corridor? Carter asked. The room went quiet. Holt looked at his tablet. I don't have visibility on that. Donovan spoke for the first time. His voice was measured, flat, carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent 30 years watching wars get complicated. Delta wars never stay simple, Lieutenant Carter. Go in clean. Come out with what you went in for. Anything that doesn't fit your mission parameters, you radio me first. You don't act unilaterally. You understand? Yes, Sergeant. Good. He stood, and the meeting was over. In the hallway afterward, he'd pulled her aside, just for a moment. There's a second layer to this op, he'd said quietly. I can't brief you on it, but if you see activity that looks like it belongs to a friendly foreign service, and you'll know it when you see it, you do not engage. You observe. You report. That's all. Mossad? He hadn't answered, just looked at her for a long beat and walked away. She'd spent the next 36 hours preparing her kit, recalibrating her rifle, studying elevation maps of a terrain that no longer matched its elevation maps, and thinking about the things Jack Donovan didn't say. She'd known Donovan for 4 years. She'd first met him at the Special Operations Sniper Course at Fort Bragg, where he'd appeared for a single afternoon session as a guest instructor and had proceeded to dismantle everything she thought she knew about long-range wind reading. He was 63 years old and moved like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had gotten so used to the weight he no longer noticed it. His hair was white, his hands were steady. When he spoke, he used fewer words than anyone she'd ever met in the military, and every word was load-bearing. She'd learned to pay attention to the words he didn't use as much as the ones he did. In 4 years, she'd seen him at 7 deployments, always in some liaison or contractor capacity that was never fully explained to her. He showed up where things were complicated. He knew people on every side of every conflict she'd worked in, and he had a particular quality she'd come to rely on. He never told her something was dangerous unless it was significantly more dangerous than he was letting on. There's a second layer to this op. The way he'd said it, not warning her off, but warning her that the map had edges she couldn't see yet. That was Donovan operating at the outer boundary of what he could tell her without crossing lines she didn't know existed. She'd loaded her kit and thought about Iranian proxy networks and Israeli tracking chips and what, exactly, floated between those two things in the gray space of a flooded delta 60 kilometers from the Iranian border. The engine sound reached her before the heat signature did. A low diesel murmur, throttled back, moving carefully through the channel. Carter tracked left along the roofline until she found it. A low-profile wooden boat, maybe 8 meters, dark tarp over the cargo amidships, 2 men visible. One at the tiller, one forward with a pole, feeling for obstacles beneath the surface. She noted the time, 1:12, 47 minutes ahead of the intelligence window. Early, they changed the schedule. She keyed her radio twice, the signal to Donovan that she had eyes on. His response came back immediately, 2 clicks, acknowledging. She ranged the boat, 740 meters, not a difficult shot in normal conditions. Tonight, with the humidity sitting at 93% and vapor rising off the water in visible bands between her position and the target, it was a problem. She dialed a correction into her elevation turret, then another for the lateral refraction she'd estimated from watching the way the fog moved. Not the way the weather forecast said it would move, but the actual movement, the specific behavior of this air over this water on this night. The forward man on the boat shipped his pole and crouched beside the tarp. He peeled it back. Carter saw the outline of stacked crates, military spec, foam-lined, the kind used for electronics transport. Her jaw tightened. That's the shipment. She settled her breathing. 3-second exhale, controlled. The reticle drifted with her heartbeat and then steadied in the pause between beats. Primary target, the tiller man. Eliminate propulsion, the boat drifts, the cargo stays recoverable. Standard interdiction protocol. Her finger moved to the trigger. She gave herself one more breath. The boat exploded. Not from her shot. She hadn't fired. Her finger was still moving through the trigger's take-up when the cargo section disintegrated in a white-orange flash that turned the channel into daylight for 3 full seconds. The pressure wave reached her a half-beat later, a physical thump against her chest, against the tower, against the water below, which rippled outward in perfect concentric rings. The tarp was gone. The forward man was gone. The tiller man was in the water, burning. Carter pulled back from the scope. She'd heard no shot, no sonic crack, no downrange report. Whatever had hit that boat had been suppressed to near silence. Subsonic, maybe, or a shaped charge triggered remotely. She didn't know which. She needed to know which. She swept the scope northwest. Elevated positions. Anything above the waterline. The thermal flickered. There, a signature, human-shaped, prone, elevated maybe 15 meters on what looked like the roof of a grain storage building 300 meters northwest. The heat bloom was minimal. Whoever it was had been motionless long enough to cool down to near ambient. A professional, someone who knew how to wait. The signature moved, not fast, deliberate, repositioning. They know the shot drew attention. They're moving before anyone can trace them. Carter tracked the movement for 4 seconds before it vanished behind a collapsed section of wall. Her radio crackled. "Falcon!" Donovan's voice was controlled, but she'd worked with him long enough to hear the thing underneath the control. "Report." "Boat's gone," she said, keeping her voice flat. "I didn't fire. Somebody else is operating in my AO." A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "Describe the shot signature." "No visible flash from my angle. Suppressed. Possible shape charge but no secondary. The cargo didn't cook off, which means either it's not what we thought it was or—" She stopped. "Or someone hit it with enough precision to destroy the boat without detonating the components," Donovan finished. "Yes." Another pause. "Sit tight. Do not relocate. Do not engage anything until I come back to you." She sat tight. She watched the burning wreckage drift slowly south. She watched the tillerman stop moving in the water. She watched the northwest roofline and thought about the heat signature, about how long it must have been motionless to cool that far, about what kind of patience that required. Professional patience, the kind built over years. "Who are you?" The second boat arrived 22 minutes later. Carter almost missed it. She'd been focused on the northwest sector, tracking shadow patterns, trying to rebuild the geometry of where the other shooter might have repositioned. The second boat came from the east, a different approach vector than the intelligence had indicated, and it was smaller. A flat-bottomed skiff, one engine, running without lights. She ranged it, 510 meters. She found the cargo through the scope and felt something shift in her chest. Children, 2 of them sitting in the bow, wrapped in blankets, a woman beside them, and then 3 men working quickly, pulling crates from beneath the seating, transferring them to a waiting point on a half-submerged rooftop where the water was shallow enough to stand. Moving fast, practiced. They'd done this before. They're using the family as cover. Carter's jaw tightened. She tracked the man directing the transfer, mid-40s, heavy, giving hand signals to the others. She noted the way he stood, the way he moved, the way he occasionally put his hand briefly on the shoulder of the older child, the boy, a gesture that was automatic rather than deliberate, the unconscious contact of a father. She pulled her eye from the scope. The intelligence package had said nothing about civilians integrated into the smuggling operation. Either the package was wrong or they'd adapted. Either way, she had a problem. She keyed the radio. "Falcon to Overwatch. Second boat, eastern approach. 510 meters. Cargo transfer in progress. Civilian presence. Woman, 2 children, possibly family of principal." Donovan came back immediately. "Can you get a clear shot on the principal?" She looked through the scope again. The boy was standing up now, helping shift a smaller crate. 6 years old, maybe 7. "Negative," she said, "not clean." "Copy." A pause. "Observe and document. Don't force it." She documented. She counted crates. She noted the rooftop transfer points coordinates. She memorized the principal's face in the way he moved and the automatic hand on the boy's shoulder. When the transfer was complete, both boats departed in different directions. The cargo stayed on the rooftop, covered with what looked like fishing nets. She filed it away, all of it. The thing that stayed with her longest, though, was the boy's face when he turned for a moment toward the north, toward her general position, toward nothing in particular. Just a child looking at the dark water and the darker sky above it. She thought, whatever I have to do out here, that face stays out of it. She didn't know yet how hard that promise would be to keep. At 0317, the radio died. Not a gradual fade, a sudden, total absence of signal, as if someone had reached into the electromagnetic spectrum and removed the frequency she was using. Carter clicked the transmit button 3 times. Nothing. Switched to the emergency frequency. Nothing. Tried the satellite uplink. Nothing. She sat with the silence for 30 seconds, cataloging its texture. This wasn't a battery failure or a component fault. The handset was drawing power normally, the display read full signal strength, and yet nothing was going out and nothing was coming in. Jamming. She'd been briefed on Iranian electronic warfare capabilities in the corridor. The IRGC ran mobile jamming platforms, converted civilian vehicles with software-defined radio systems capable of blanket suppression across military communication bands. They were primitive compared to U.S. systems, but brutally effective in enclosed terrain where signal bounce made triangulating the source nearly impossible. She was now operating solo. No overwatch, no extraction coordination, no way to pass intel up the chain. She took a slow breath and ran her options. She had her rifle, 214 rounds, 4 days of food and water, her thermal optic, a satellite phone with a battery she hadn't checked recently, and a compass. She did not have communications, a confirmed extraction timeline, any idea where the second operator was, or a clear picture of what she'd walked into. She checked the satellite phone. The screen lit, ran through its startup cycle, then showed her a single icon, a red circle with a line through it. The jamming was hitting satellite frequencies too. That's not a mobile platform, she thought. That's a fixed installation, or something very large. She pulled her map, oriented herself, thought about the northwest roofline where she'd seen the heat signature, thought about what kind of operation would have both the capability and the reason to jam the entire electromagnetic environment around this particular stretch of flooded delta. A very well-resourced operation. She began preparing to move at first light. She spent the remaining pre-dawn hours doing what any good sniper did when everything went wrong at once. She simplified. Stripped the problem down to what she knew for certain versus what she was assuming. The certain things she could act on. The assumed things could get her killed. What she knew, there was a second shooter, professional grade, operating within half a kilometer of her position. There was Israeli intelligence hardware inside an Iranian proxy smuggling shipment. The electronic environment had been deliberately suppressed, and whatever operation she'd been briefed into had at least one additional layer that her mission package hadn't covered. What she was assuming, that the second shooter was hostile to her. She had no actual evidence of that. The shooter had eliminated a smuggling boat. That was, technically, the same objective she'd been assigned. Different methods, possibly different reasons, but same target. Donovan had told her, if you see activity that belongs to a friendly foreign service, you observe and report. She couldn't report. The jamming had made sure of that, so she would observe. She folded her map, tucked it into her chest rig, and began the slow process of breaking down her position. She cached what she couldn't carry. 2 boxes of ammunition she'd leave in a waterproof bag wedged in the tower's superstructure. If she came back for them, she came back for them. If she didn't, they'd sit there until the tower finally finished falling into the water. She moved out at 0503, slow, deliberate, listening to the insects the whole way. She found the body at 0531, wedged against the base of a half-submerged wall in 1.5 meters of stagnant water. Carter had moved carefully along the rooftop route, stepping from surface to surface, testing each one before committing her weight. The water below was opaque. She didn't want to go in. 3 times she'd had to wade short gaps where the rooftop chain broke, and each time the mud beneath the surface had tried to hold her boots. A slow, organic suction that cost energy she needed to conserve. The dead man was the tiller operator from the first boat. He'd survived the explosion. She could see the water had carried him this far, but not the burns. He was face down. She turned him over carefully, checking for booby traps first. Nothing. His jacket was a commercial pattern, no military markings, standard for Iranian proxy logistics personnel. She went through his pockets. A phone with a shattered screen, 200 in US dollars folded tight, a laminated ID card in Arabic she photographed with her secondary camera for later exploitation. Then she felt the shape in the interior pocket. She pulled it out. A small metal capsule, the kind used for waterproof document transport. She opened it. Inside was a folded square of plastic sheeting with something printed on it, a serial number, a set of GPS coordinates, and a small sticker. The sticker was a barcode. She photographed it. But it was the object beneath the plastic sheeting that stopped her. A microchip, smaller than her thumbnail. Printed on its carrier was a manufacturer's code she recognized, not because she'd memorized it, but because it had been on the briefing slide 2 days ago. The slide she wasn't supposed to ask questions about. The chip was Israeli. Not Israeli manufactured in the broad sense of a product that passed through supply chains. Israeli in the specific sense of a tracking and identification system used by one particular intelligence service for marking assets and shipments inside denied territory. She sat with that for a long moment. Someone tagged this cargo before it got on the boat. Someone with access to Mossad tracking hardware had placed an identifier inside this smuggling shipment, not to interdict it, but to follow it, to see where it went and who touched it and what happened to it. And then another shooter had destroyed the boat before it could reach its destination. She thought about Donovan's words in the hallway. If you see activity that looks like it belongs to a friendly foreign service. She thought about the heat signature on the northwest roofline. She thought about the precision of the shot that had hit the boat's engine compartment specifically, destroying propulsion and crew without detonating the cargo. Whoever fired that shot was trying to preserve the hardware, or destroy it before it could be tracked to its destination. She didn't know which. She needed to know which. The answer was the difference between an operation that made sense and a war she hadn't been told she was standing in. She pocketed the chip, stood up, looked northwest. She ran the logic again because she was the kind of person who needed to run it twice before she trusted it. The IRGC proxy network was moving missile guidance hardware. That was confirmed. The Israeli chip in the cargo meant Mossad, or someone using Mossad hardware, had tagged the shipment at some point before it got on the boat. That required access at the source, or at a transit point, or through an asset embedded inside the network. Any of those options represented a significant intelligence operation that had been running in this corridor for weeks or months. Then a second shooter had destroyed the first boat. The shooter was professional, patient, and used a suppressed round that hit the engine compartment with precision that ruled out an amateur. The shot had killed the crew, but preserved the cargo zone intact for the first few seconds. Carter had seen it with her own eyes. Whoever fired had not been trying to destroy the hardware. They'd been trying to stop the boat from reaching its destination. 2 operations. Same objective, the hardware, different methods. One operation tracking it, one operation stopping it, or one operation that had shifted from tracking to stopping for reasons she didn't have yet. First, she thought, I need to understand who else is out here. She started moving northwest, careful, slow, stepping where the surface looked solid, and listening for the way the roofing material responded to her weight before she committed. The insects covered her movement completely. In the east, the sky was beginning to gray. She was already calculating angles of approach to the grain storage building. She needed to reach it before full light. The grain storage building had been a 3-story structure once. Now it was 1.5. The ground floor completely submerged, the second floor accessible only by a rusted external staircase that disappeared into black water at the 4th step. Carter reached it by crossing 7 rooftops in 40 minutes, a process that required more patience than movement. She tested each surface. She waited after each transition. She listened. The building's upper half was concrete rather than mud brick, which meant it had held its shape better than the surrounding structures. The roof was intact except for a section on the north face where something heavy had punched through. Collapse from above, not below. Old damage. The interior of the upper floor was accessible through a door that hung at a 40-degree angle on one surviving hinge. She went through low and fast, cleared the space in 10 seconds, and then stood still in the dimness, letting her eyes adjust. The room was not empty. Equipment had been here, recently. She could see the indentations in the grime on the floor, rectangular, uniform, the kind left by hard-sided cases that had been staged and then moved. 3 distinct sets. The largest impression was roughly the size of a communications relay case. The smaller 2 could have been almost anything: electronics, weapons, medical supplies. She crouched and studied the impressions without touching them. The grime at the edges was disturbed but not dried out. Within the last 18 hours, maybe less. Then she found the drone relay. It was in the corner behind the collapsed door section, half covered by a piece of fallen ceiling material. Whoever had been here had left it deliberately, not forgotten, but cached. It was a commercial quadcopter platform modified with additional antenna arrays, the kind used to extend radio relay chains in denied terrain. The battery was dead. The memory card slot was empty. But on the antenna housing, scratched into the anodized aluminum with something sharp, was a string of characters. Cyrillic, then numerals. She photographed it with her secondary camera, filed the image, added it to the growing list of things she needed to get to Donovan, who she currently had no way of reaching. She moved to the window and looked out over the delta. From this elevation, she could see 3 kilometers in every direction. The floodplain spread out like a gray mirror in the early morning light, broken by rooftops and tree crowns, and the occasional standing wall that stuck up from the water like a rotting tooth. To the north, a line of submerged palms marked what had once been a road. To the east, the channel she'd been watching all night curved out of sight behind a collapsed grain silo. She took a full minute to map everything visible from this position, committed it to memory the way Donovan had drilled her, not photographing with the camera, which could be lost or captured, but building the terrain model inside her head. Every structure she could use, every gap she couldn't cross without swimming, every shadow that was deep enough to work in during daylight. The drone relay in the corner kept pulling her attention. She went back to it. She took it apart with careful hands. Not completely. She didn't want to leave evidence she'd tampered with it, just enough to understand it. The antenna array modifications were professional work, not field improvisation. Someone with genuine electronic engineering background had integrated the additional relay components. The housing was civilian commercial, DJI platform, the kind you could buy in any electronics market in Dubai or Erbil, but the modifications inside were not civilian. They were the kind of modifications that required test equipment and calibration that didn't exist in a flooded delta, which meant they'd been done elsewhere and transported here, which meant there was a logistics chain behind this operation, a support structure, places where people sat at workbenches and built components that ended up inside gutted commercial drones in abandoned buildings in flooded Iraqi delta terrain. She photographed the interior with her secondary camera, photographed the Cyrillic inscription twice more from different angles. Then she reassembled it, replaced the ceiling material, and left it where she'd found it. And on the rooftop of a half-submerged structure 400 meters northwest, movement. Not a person, a shimmer, heat differential, something that had been warm recently and was now cooling in the morning air. She raised her Mark 22 and used the scope as an observation tool, not a weapon. Dialed for the range. The shimmer resolved into the outline of a prone position, a body-length depression in the grime and moss on the rooftop, compressed by weight, the edges already starting to dry as the morning heat touched them. She measured it against the scale markers in her reticle. The depression was approximately 185 centimeters long. Average male height, heavy build, or average height with equipment. The compression was uniform, not deeper at the shoulders the way a lighter frame shooter would register. Big man, patient, had been stationary long enough to leave a clear impression in the surface grime. The shooter had been there, had set up, observed, and moved again, sometime in the last 2 hours, while she was crossing the rooftops. They're moving parallel to me, she thought. Not toward me, not away. Parallel. She studied the rooftop depression for a long moment. The position faced south-southeast, toward the channel, toward the boat's last location, toward the cargo transfer point she'd observed the previous night. The shooter had been watching the same thing she was watching, tracking the same network. But there was something else. She looked at the sightline carefully. From that position, with the elevation of the roof and the arc of observation it provided, the shooter would also have had a clear line of sight to Carter's original tower position, to her original nest, to where she'd been sitting for 4 hours of the night watching boats. They'd known where she was, and they hadn't taken the shot. That was a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice made by a trained shooter who had the geometry, the visibility, and apparently the skill to have ended this differently. Instead, they'd watched her, cataloged her, and moved on. She filed it in the column marked "Not Hostile, Reason Unknown." But the column was starting to fill with entries, and the pattern they were forming was beginning to suggest something she wasn't ready to name yet. She heard it before she felt it. A sharp crack, not close, not distant, somewhere in the precise middle distance that made locating it by sound nearly impossible. Then the secondary sound a fraction of a second later, a round, impacting water 30 meters to her right, at an angle that told her the shot had originated northwest and slightly elevated. Carter was already moving before the water had finished splashing. She rolled left off the rooftop edge she'd been using as a rest position and dropped onto a lower surface, landing in a controlled fall that kept her rifle up and her head below the ridgeline. The mud brick under her compressed but held. She pressed flat and didn't move. 30 seconds. 60. Nothing. She processed the shot geometry while she waited. The round had hit water, not structure, deliberate at that range for a shooter of this caliber. If they'd wanted to hit her, the shot would have been different, closer to her body, less forgiving of the angle. This shot had landed 30 meters away. A ranging shot, she thought, but not for me. Then she understood. She'd seen the boat explode the night before without hearing a crack, because the shooter had been using suppressed subsonic rounds for the actual kill. But a subsonic round wouldn't travel accurately at the distances they were dealing with here. Not in this vapor-heavy air. You had to shoot supersonic first to read the environment. The vapor density, the crosswind above the waterline, the refraction differential between the air layers. Get your data, then switch to suppress for work that needed silence. The round had been a calibration shot, into water, to measure the delta between the actual impact point and the calculated point, the refraction error introduced by this specific air on this specific morning at this specific range. They're dialing for a long shot, not at me, at something beyond me. She processed that for a moment and felt something shift in her professional assessment of this person. You didn't calibrate through open water for a target at your own elevation. You did it when you needed to account for the air-water interface, the thermal boundary where air temperature dropped sharply over the waterline and bent light, and therefore bent bullets, in ways that increased with distance. A shot across 400 meters of open water in morning humidity required different data than a shot across land. This shooter wasn't just patient. They understood the physics of their specific environment. They'd probably been here long enough to have built a range card for this exact terrain, a personalized document of corrections for specific ranges, wind conditions, humidity levels, all of it pre-calculated so they could engage quickly when the moment came. How long have you been here, she thought? Before me, before the boats. How long were you watching before any of this started? She risked a slow rise to just above the roofline, looked northwest, looked at what lay behind her position, further southeast. The cargo transfer point, the rooftop where the crates had been left under fishing nets, which she'd confirmed at 0620 were still in place. Someone was solving for a shot at that rooftop, building the solution with suppressed round precision, calibrating for the specific optical challenges of this air over this water at this hour of the morning. She keyed her radio by reflex. Silence. Right. Jamming. She watched the northwest sector and thought very carefully about what it meant that the other shooter was ranging for the cargo rather than for her. Thought about the Israeli chip. Thought about an operation that had tagged a shipment and now, for reasons she still didn't have, needed to destroy it before it moved again. She also thought about what she'd observed the first night. The boat had been hit in the engine compartment. Not the hull, not the cargo section, specifically the mechanical components that made the boat move. The crew had died in the subsequent explosion, but the cargo section had held intact for at least 4 seconds before sympathetic fire had caught it. 4 seconds was long enough to board and extract hardware, if you had a team positioned to do so. They were trying to stop the boat, not destroy the cargo. The first shot had been interdiction, not demolition. Something had changed between then and now, and she didn't know what. 2 possibilities. Either the operation had changed objectives, or the situation had changed and the hardware could no longer be allowed to reach its destination under any circumstances. She needed more information. She had no way to get it. She decided to hold. She would watch the transfer point, she would watch the northwest sector, and she would not fire unless she had a target she fully understood. The delta settled back into its breathing sounds around her. The insects, the water, the distant generator hum from somewhere she still hadn't located, a fixed installation, probably northeast, running something large and continuous, something that didn't need to hide its power consumption. Underneath all of it, she could feel the other shooter out there. Not see, not hear. Feel, in the way you felt a thunderstorm before it arrived, as a pressure change, a shift in the quality of the air. The awareness of something massive and patient just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for the right moment exactly as she was waiting, but working from a different picture of what that moment meant. They moved at 1940, when the light was dying but the thermal was still useful. 3 figures, single file, moving along a rooftop chain Carter hadn't mapped because it was north of her operational sector. She discounted it as too exposed, too far from the main channel. These 3 were using it anyway, which told her they'd scouted it in advance. They knew this terrain. They'd been here before she arrived. She tracked them through the thermal. The lead figure moved with a specific quality she recognized, the careful, rolling heel-to-toe gait of someone trained to minimize ground vibration while carrying weight. Military trained. The second figure was larger, carrying what looked like a long, rectangular case. The third covered their rear, facing backward at intervals, a move she'd only seen done properly by operators who'd trained it into muscle memory. They were good. The lead figure stopped, raised a hand. The column halted. The lead looked east, directly toward Carter's current position. She froze. She was below the thermal differential threshold at this distance, she hoped. She'd been stationary for 40 minutes, and the ambient temperature was still warm enough that her body heat wasn't generating a sharp bloom. Probably. The lead figure stared for a long 4 seconds, then turned north again. The column moved. Carter exhaled. She tracked them until they disappeared into the upper floor of a structure 500 meters north. A building with enough remaining walls to give them concealment on 3 sides and a clear line of observation southward, directly over the main channel, the cargo transfer point, and most of Carter's operational area. They're setting up Overwatch, she thought. On the same area I'm watching, 3 operators, a long case, either a heavy sniper system or a communications array. an established familiarity with the terrain, operating without any coordination with her unit, which she'd have been briefed on. She gave them 15 minutes to settle before she moved her scope to the building's windows. The upper floor had 3 window openings on the south face. All 3 were dark, no light emission, no visible movement. But through the thermal, she caught the faint, residual warmth of recent human occupation. 3 distinct body temperature sources arranged in a line on what would be the south-facing wall. They were prone at the windows, all 3 of them, all at once, immediately after setup. That told her something important. They weren't taking turns. They weren't resting shifts. All 3 were on observation simultaneously, which meant they expected something to happen soon, within their watch window, and they couldn't afford to miss it. She checked her timepiece. 2017. Night operations in this corridor typically peak between 2200 and 0200. Whatever they were watching for, they thought it was coming within the next 4 to 6 hours. She thought about what that meant against what she knew. The second cargo shipment, the crates she'd observed in the rooftop transfer, hadn't moved yet. If the Israeli team knew the movement schedule, they'd be positioned for it. We're all waiting for the same thing, she thought. The Russian PMC sniper, the Israeli team, Carter, all of them watching the same stretch of water, all of them with different orders and different objectives and different pictures of what was actually happening here. She thought about what 3 Mossad operators and 1 Russian PMC sniper and the remains of an Iranian proxy smuggling network in a flooded Iraqi delta meant when you put them all together in the same 2-kilometer circle. She thought, Donovan needs to know about this. She thought, Donovan still can't hear me. She thought about the Israeli chip in the dead man's jacket, the precision of the first kill shot, engine compartment, not cargo, the ranging round into water, the parallel movement, the message she hadn't received yet, but that was building in the dark the way pressure built before a storm. Everything in this delta was connected. She couldn't see the full picture yet, but she could feel the shape of it, the way you felt the edge of a piece of darkness in an unlit room. You knew it was there before you could name it. She went back to watching the channel and waiting for the second shipment to move. By the end of the second day, the math was turning against her. Carter sat with her back against a concrete wall, out of sight lines, and did the accounting. Food, 1 day remaining if she was conservative, half a day if she maintained operational activity levels. Water. She had filtration tablets, and the delta provided no shortage of surface water. But filtering standing floodwater in this corridor was slow, and the tablets didn't handle everything. She'd risk getting sick, which was a different kind of mission failure. Ammo. 162 rounds remaining after the cash boxes, which was plenty for a sniper engagement, but thin if the situation escalated to something else. The satellite phone still showed the red denial icon. The jamming hadn't degraded. She tried moving north, once, carefully, to see if the jamming had a boundary. It did not, or the boundary was further than she could safely probe. She turned back after 400 meters when the rooftop chain deteriorated into open water gaps she'd have had to swim. And a storm was building to the west. She'd watched the cloud bank accumulating all afternoon, tall, dark-bottomed, the kind of system that came off the Gulf of Oman and hit the delta marshlands with a particular violence. The wind had already shifted twice. She could smell rain in the air, that specific mineral scent that preceded heavy weather in lowland terrain. The kind of storm that would make the water rise and the rooftops she was using as roads disappear. She needed extraction coordinates confirmed. She needed resupply at minimum. She needed Donovan. She picked up the satellite phone again, the red icon. She almost threw it into the water. Instead, she sat with it and thought about her options systematically, the way he'd taught her. You always have more options than you think. The problem is, most of them are bad. Your job is to find the one that's only slightly bad. Option 1. Stay put, conserve resources, wait for the jamming to lift. Risk. The storm eliminates her rooftop mobility before extraction can happen. Option 2. Push south toward the coast where a maritime extraction might be possible. Risk: open water, greater exposure, no cover. Option 3. Find the jamming source and disable it. Risk: direct confrontation with whoever was running it. Reward: communication restored, coordination possible, mission potentially recoverable. She looked at the storm clouds and thought about the Israeli team and the Russian PMC sniper and the cargo that was still sitting under fishing nets on a rooftop 400 meters away. She was going to have to do something active. She couldn't wait this out. She began planning for option 3. The smugglers moved the cargo at 2140. Carter saw it from her new position, lower, further west, a vantage point that gave her a longer angle on the rooftop transfer zone. She'd moved 2 hours before dark, anticipating that the cargo would shift tonight under the cover of the incoming storm. She'd been right. Whoever was running this network was good at reading weather as cover. 5 men this time. No boats visible. They were moving the crates by hand, wading through chest-deep water in a human chain, passing the cargo along a route she hadn't mapped because it didn't follow any logical path she'd have predicted. They were using submerged structures as stepping points, a route that required knowing exactly where those structures were, which required having walked it before. Local knowledge, she thought. They've been running this route for months. She identified the principal immediately, the heavy man from the first night, giving hand signals, directing traffic. 40 meters behind him, she found them in a single sweep and felt her chest contract. The family, the woman, the older child, the boy. They weren't participating. They were sitting on a raised section of masonry, an old window ledge above the waterline, watching, waiting. The boy had his arms around his knees, his head turned slightly north, toward the dark, open water, the way a child did when they were bored, and the adults around them were busy with adult things that didn't include them. 3 meters from the principal, close enough that any shot geometry toward him intersected the space they occupied. He knows, Carter thought. He saw what happened to the first boat. He knows there's a shooter in this AO, and he's keeping them close on purpose. She held the shot and watched. The boy stood up, walked toward the principal and pulled at his sleeve, the impatient tug of a child wanting attention in the middle of work. The principal turned without breaking his hand signal to the chain, put his hand on the boy's head, a gesture so brief and automatic it clearly lived below the level of conscious thought. Then he turned back to the operation. Carter recognized that gesture. She'd cataloged it the first night. The unconscious contact. The thing a father did when his child was near. B-Day. She had the shot. She had the angle. She had the wind correction already dialed. The principal was in her reticle, and the only thing between her finger and the trigger was the boy standing 3 meters away, who had just sat back down and was looking at the water again. In the intelligence package, there had been a photograph of the principal, taken from surveillance. On the back of the photograph, a handwritten note with his name and known associates. She'd memorized it the way she memorized everything, completely, automatically. His name was Karimi. He had a wife and 3 children. The family was from Basra originally. They'd moved to the Delta Corridor because the work paid. She knew his son's name was the same as the name on the photograph. She'd made that connection when she first saw the boy's face 3 nights ago. She hadn't said it out loud. She was saying it now, inside her head, because she needed to be honest about what she was holding in her reticle and what it would cost. Beat B. Her radio crackled. The jamming had lightened, not gone, but degraded enough for Donovan's voice to push through in fragments. Falcon, if you read 4 minutes on the primary, repeat 4 minutes. She pressed transmit. Overwatch, Falcon. I copy. Say again full message. Cargo moves in 4. Guidance package. Cannot reach handoff. Carter, you need to take the shot. 4 minutes. The human chain was 2/3 complete. In 4 minutes, the crates would be off the rooftop and in the water, heading north, and she would not catch them again before the handoff. She had the shot. The boy looked up at the sky, at the clouds building to the west, at something only he was tracking in the dark air above the flooded village, where his father worked and his family waited on a ledge above the waterline. Overwatch. Her voice was flat, steady. The steadiness cost her something she didn't have a name for. I have civilian presence in the kill zone. Woman and 2 children within 3 meters of principal. I cannot confirm a clean shot. Falcon, the package. I heard you. She kept her eye at the scope, kept the reticle on Karimi, watched him direct the last of the transfer with sharp hand signals, watched the chain complete, watched the crates go into the water onto some submerged structure she couldn't see. My answer is negative. I will not fire into a family. Beat C. The radio dissolved into jamming. The window closed. The transfer completed. The cargo moved north. Karimi shepherded his family east, along a route that disappeared into the flooded structures within minutes. Carter held her position for a long time after they were gone, longer than she needed to. The rooftop transfer zone was empty. The water was empty. The north approach route was empty. She had just let the missile guidance package walk out of her kill zone. She'd had the shot. She'd chosen not to take it. And the hardware was now moving north toward a handoff point that Donovan had described in terms clear enough. If delivered, Israeli cities at risk. She pressed her forehead against the stock of her rifle. She stayed there for 30 seconds, counted her breathing, let the cold rain hit the back of her neck. Then she raised her head. She had made her choice. She had made it cleanly, with full awareness of the cost. Now she had to make it mean something. There was another way to stop the hardware. There had to be, because the alternative was accepting that keeping those children alive had condemned other people, and she was not going to accept that. She began moving north. She was going to find the jamming source. She was going to restore communication. She was going to find another angle on this problem, and she was going to carry the image of that boy looking at the sky for the rest of her life, in the part of her memory she kept for the things that cost the most. The jamming lifted at 0034, not gradually, completely. One moment the electromagnetic spectrum was a wall, and the next moment it was open. And Carter's handset lit up with 3 missed signal attempts from Donovan's relay channel before she could even key the transmit button. She pressed it. Overwatch, Falcon, I'm up. Copy. His voice was tight, tighter than she'd heard it before. Report position. She gave him coordinates, heard him processing it. You're 400 meters from the secondary relay node. Do not approach it. Falcon, listen carefully. The situation has escalated. What I'm about to tell you was above your clearance level 2 hours ago. It's not anymore. She waited. The guidance package isn't for a standard missile platform. A pause. The kind of pause he used when he was choosing words carefully under pressure. It contains an AI targeting module, commercially sourced, Chinese components, but the integration architecture is Iranian defense contractor work. If it reaches the delivery point, it can be adapted to guide a precision strike. And I mean precision, building-level accuracy, launched from proxy forces in southern Lebanon, against Israel, against a specific target in Israel, something that would be attributed to Iran directly, not a proxy, something that would force a response. Another pause. Sarah, this isn't interdiction anymore. If this package reaches the handoff, we're looking at a regional escalation event, not theoretical, timed. We have 18 hours on the intelligence estimate. She sat with that for 3 seconds. The Israeli team in the AO, I know about them. Do they know about the AI module? That's what I've been trying to determine. His voice shifted, something underneath it she couldn't immediately identify. There's a possibility that the Israeli operation isn't just tracking the shipment. There's a possibility they have a different objective entirely. Preventing the attribution, she said. Yes. She thought about the Russian PMC sniper, about the shot that had destroyed the first boat without detonating the cargo, about the ranging shot into the water, about the message she hadn't seen yet, but that was coming. She could feel it building the way you could feel a storm building. Donovan, the second shooter in the AO, the non-Israeli operator. What do you know? A pause that was different from his usual pauses. Longer, with something in it she couldn't read. I'm still working on confirmation. Stay on mission. Do not engage either the Israeli team or the unidentified shooter unless directly threatened. Then quieter. Carter, I need you to trust me on something. Go ahead. There may come a point where I give you information through an unofficial channel. It'll be flagged. You'll know it when you see it. When that happens, treat it as priority intelligence. Don't wait for me to explain it. Act on it. She frowned. What does that mean, unofficial channel? It means I may have to do something that costs me to get you what you need. His voice was completely level. That was the tell. Jack Donovan went level when the stakes went up. Don't argue about it when it happens. Just use what I send you. Before she could respond, the jamming came back. She sat in the silence of a suppressed, electromagnetic environment and thought about what Jack Donovan was preparing to do that he couldn't tell her about. She constructed every version she could. The most likely, he was going to use an asset he shouldn't use. Make a contact he'd burn bridges to maintain. Pull a thread that connected him to something he'd been keeping off the books, and the act of pulling it would be visible to people who monitored those threads. CIA oversight, NSC liaisons, the particular category of bureaucrat who existed specifically to watch for case officers going sideways. Donovan had 30 years of gray zone work. He had relationships in services that the U.S. officially didn't coordinate with on certain matters. He had access to things he wasn't supposed to have access to, which was precisely why they kept attaching him to operations where the official picture was incomplete. He was going to use one of those things, and using it would leave a trace. The kind of trace that ended careers. The kind that resulted in a man's security clearances being reviewed, his contractor status suspended, his file flagged for the particular kind of scrutiny that didn't end with a reprimand. It ended with a retirement that wasn't voluntary and a silence that was. She'd worked with Jack Donovan for 4 years. She'd watched him walk into briefing rooms where half the people in the room didn't trust him and the other half were afraid of him. And she'd watched him navigate both groups with the particular patience of a man who understood that trust was a renewable resource and fear was not. She'd watched him protect operators in the field by absorbing institutional friction that would have gotten those operators pulled from missions they needed to finish. And now he was telling her that finishing this mission might require him to absorb something larger, something that would cost him the career, the access, the position he'd spent 30 years building into something that could actually help people in places where the official apparatus couldn't reach. Don't argue about it when it happens. Just use what I send you. She wasn't going to argue. She was going to make sure it was worth it. She checked her map, identified the relay node coordinates, began calculating approach routes that would work in a storm with 2 IRGC guards on the perimeter and a Russian contractor somewhere to the northwest. 6 hours on the intelligence estimate, less now with the jamming back up. She moved out. She found it at 0312. She'd been crossing the secondary rooftop chain, heading toward the relay node Donovan had mentioned, staying below the skyline, moving with the storm wind as cover, when her boot caught something that wasn't roofing material. She stopped, looked down. A strip of metal, flat, roughly 30 centimeters long, angled against the low parapet like it had been placed there deliberately. She crouched and examined it without touching it. No tripwire, no attachment, just a piece of flashing material, the kind used on roof edges in this region, with marks on the inner surface. She tilted it to catch the ambient light. Words, scratched with something sharp. Not Arabic. English written in capital letters with a slightly irregular hand. Someone for whom English was a working language, not a native one. Leave the delta. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the scratching tool. Not a knife. The mark width was wrong for a knife. Too narrow. The depth consistent. A bullet tip. She turned the strip over. On the outer surface, a partial head stamp was visible where the bullet had been pressed against the metal to make the mark. The stamping that identified the cartridge manufacturer and caliber. She could read 3 characters. She recognized the format. U.S. military specification. Not Russian, not Iranian. A cartridge that would be found in American ammunition stocks. She sat back on her heels and processed that. The message was in English, written with an American bullet, left where she would find it on a route she hadn't announced to anyone. He's been tracking my movement, she thought. He knows my patterns. And he was warning her, not threatening, warning. Leave the delta. She thought about that phrasing, not leave or you die, not this is your last warning, just leave. The imperative of a man telling someone to get clear of something dangerous, not the imperative of a man marking territory. She took a photograph of the metal strip, photographed the head stamp, then she kept moving toward the relay node. She was not leaving the delta, but she was paying very close attention to who was asking her to. The storm arrived at 0400, and the delta became a different world. Rain hit the water surface so hard it looked like the water was boiling. Visibility dropped to 200 meters, then 100, then to the point where Carter was navigating by memory and compass, and the tactile information of roof textures under her boots. The wind was lateral and gusting, not a straight flow she could correct for, but irregular, the kind that changed direction over 5-second intervals. Shooting in this was a different discipline entirely. You didn't solve for wind, you waited for a window. She'd found a position behind a collapsed water tower that gave her coverage on the northern approach route and partial observation of the relay node, which turned out to be a converted power substation with solar panels on the roof, still partly functional, which was how it was running the jamming equipment. She'd identified 2 IRGC technical personnel moving around its perimeter in rain gear, which told her the installation was defended. She was not going through 2 IRGC guards in a storm in flooding terrain without better information. So she waited. And while she waited, the other shooter moved. She caught the first sign at 0447, a subtle disruption in the rain pattern hitting the structure 40 meters to her east. Rain in flat conditions fell predictably. Introduce a body into the space above a surface, and the rain deflects, arrives at the surface in a slightly altered pattern, creates a shadow in the sound. She'd heard about it in training from an old instructor at Fort Bragg, who claimed to have detected moving contacts this way. She'd been skeptical, filed it in the category of stories that were probably 70% true and 30% the glamour of memory sharpening things that had been hazier in the moment. She wasn't skeptical anymore. Someone was 40 meters east and closing, moving at a pace she'd estimate at 50 meters per minute, deliberate, careful, professional, not rushing, not hesitating. She stopped moving, went completely still, regulated her breathing to the slow 4 count she used for precision shooting. Not because she was about to shoot, but because it was the technique that controlled every other physical tell. Heart rate, muscle microtremor, the involuntary tension that made knees lock and shoulders rise and generated the kind of residual heat signature that a skilled observer could read at this range, in this weather. She became, as much as biology allowed, part of the rain. At 0451, the rain pattern shifted again. The body had stopped, was stationary, 15 meters closer than before. 15 meters was very close for 2 snipers in reduced visibility, At 15 meters, even through rain and darkness, you could make out the shape of a person if you were looking in the right direction. She didn't know if she was in his sightline. She held the uncertainty and didn't move. She held for 4 minutes. Water ran down her neck, soaked through her collar, pooled in the bend of her elbow where she was braced against the water tower base. She let it happen. Any adjustment would create motion, and motion at 15 meters in the dark was a sound, a displacement of rain shadow, a tell. She thought about the message on the roof strip, "Leave the Delta," scratched with an American bullet, placed precisely where she would find it on a route she hadn't announced. A man who wanted her dead did not leave calling cards. He used the geometry he had. And this man had the geometry, repeatedly, and had done something other than use it. She made a decision. She lowered her rifle to a non-threatening angle, kept her hand on it, kept the muzzle pointed at the rooftop surface rather than at the space the other shooter occupied. And she waited, completely still, for whatever came next. Nothing came next for 4 minutes. Then the rain pattern shifted east again, moving away. The same careful, non-aggressive pace. Deliberate retreat, a withdrawal that communicated itself clearly as intentional rather than spooked. This was not a person who detected her and was pulling back to reassess. This was a person who had come to a specific distance, confirmed what they needed to confirm, and left. He was checking my position, she thought, verifying I'm still here. Why would you verify the position of someone you were trying to drive away? You wouldn't, unless knowing exactly where she was served a purpose she couldn't see from inside her current picture of the situation. She filed it and kept moving. At 05:03, she found the second message. This one was on the surface of the collapsed water tower base, pressed into the algae with a finger rather than scratched with a tool. Temporary, the rain would wash it away within an hour. 3 characters, a set of GPS coordinates, abbreviated to the last 4 digits each, the way you'd shorten them if you were working from memory and a shared datum. She identified them against her map. The relay node, not her approximate location, the exact coordinates of the substation, with something else beside them. A time, 600. He's telling me when something is going to happen at the relay node, or inviting her to be there. She looked at the time on her handset, 47 minutes. She looked at the rain and the darkness and the 2 guards at the perimeter and thought about every possible interpretation of what a Russian PMC sniper working for an Iranian proxy network would want a U.S. Army Special Operations sniper to witness at 0600 at a jamming station. She couldn't make it work. There was no version where that made sense from inside his supposed allegiances, which meant his allegiances were not what they appeared to be. She began moving toward the relay node, circling wide to approach from the south. She was in position by 0552, south face of the substation, elevated on the remains of a brick wall that had been 2 stories once and was now 8 feet of rubble, with the top course still mostly intact. She had a sight line to the north and northwest face of the building, the solar panels on the roof, and the approach routes from 3 directions. At 0557, the 2 IRGC guards moved inside, both of them, at the same time, without visible reason. Carter frowned. That was not standard behavior for a fixed installation under watch. At 0559, her radio crackled once, a brief, clear channel, a fraction of a second, just long enough to receive a single data packet. Not voice, data. Her handset logged it automatically. She accessed the received file. It was a decryption key, a 12-character string that she recognized as the format used for a specific class of encrypted military communication. Not U.S. format, a different format. One she'd seen in an intelligence annex to a joint ops briefing 14 months ago, during a training exercise with a Foreign Service liaison. She stared at it. Then she understood what Donovan had meant. An unofficial channel. He had just burned something some access, some cover, some asset to get her this key. And the file it unlocked was already in her handset, captured from an earlier transmission she hadn't been able to read. She opened the decryption app, entered the key, the file unpacked. It was not long. 47 lines of intercept text, time-stamped, sourced from the encrypted data node she'd been unable to read 3 days ago. She read it twice. Then she sat very still while the rain washed over her, and the meaning of what she'd read rearranged every assumption she'd built the last 72 hours on. The smuggling network was real. The missile guidance hardware was real. All of that was accurate. But the delivery point was not a proxy militia cache in the northern marshlands. The delivery point was a false flag staging site. The hardware was going to be deployed in a way that would make it appear Iran had conducted the attack unilaterally, not through a proxy, not deniably, but as a direct state action. The attack would be against a civilian target, high casualties. The attribution chain had been constructed with deliberate care over months. Physical evidence, electronic signatures, interceptable communications, all of it manufactured to point at the IRGC's Direct Action Division. Not planted after the fact, pre-positioned. The forensic trail had been built backward from the desired conclusion, which meant whoever had built it understood how the conclusion would be investigated and had designed the evidence to survive that investigation. This was not improvised. This had been planned at a level that required either state resources or something close to them. The goal was not the attack. The goal was the response. She sat with that for a moment, let it fully arrive. An Israeli response to a confirmed direct Iranian civilian strike would not be proportional and contained. It would be structural. It would be the end of the particular careful equilibrium that had held the region in its current configuration for 15 years. A balance of deterrence and proxy distance that both sides maintained precisely because neither could afford the alternative. One confirmed direct strike on Israeli civilians, attributed without question to the IRGC, would shatter that equilibrium. The response would be overwhelming. The counter-response would be immediate. Every state in the region with a stake in the outcome, which was all of them, would be forced to choose a side, and the choosing would cascade into something that wouldn't end at the borders of Iraq or Lebanon or Iran. Someone wanted that war, and they had constructed, with the kind of patience and resource she associated with the work of years rather than months, a mechanism to start it. And the Russian PMC sniper, Ghost of the Delta, had been trying to stop the hardware from reaching the staging site, not because he worked for the Iranian network, because he'd infiltrated the Iranian network specifically to prevent this, which meant he'd known what the hardware was for, which meant his intelligence on this operation was older and deeper than anything the U.S. had been briefed on, which meant someone had sent him here with that intelligence, someone who wanted this false flag stopped but couldn't use official channels to stop it, someone for whom official channels were the problem. She thought about every shot he'd taken, every boat he'd hit, every position he'd held and then vacated before she could trace it, every message he'd left for her. Not threats, not warnings away from his operation, but communications, information. He'd been trying to bring her into the picture from the beginning, and the jamming had made that impossible. So he'd done it in fragments, a message here, a coordinate there. A deliberate approach to within 15 meters that confirmed her position in whatever plan he was running. He'd needed her here. He'd been protecting her from getting killed by her own incomplete understanding of the situation, long enough for him to give her the full picture. Leave the Delta had not been a warning to protect his mission. It had been a warning to protect her from it, from the weight of knowing what was actually happening in this place, which was a weight that could get an operator killed if it arrived too fast and with too little context. At 0600, a sound reached her from the north face of the substation. An explosion, small, contained. The pop and crack of an electronic system being disabled from the inside. Not a breaching charge, not a demolition device. Something precise. Someone who knew exactly which component to destroy to collapse the jamming system without bringing down the building. The jamming stopped. Her handset lit up with signal, full bars, every frequency open. Donovan's channel showed active, and 40 meters northwest, through the rain and the gray early light, a figure rose from behind cover. Tall, wearing local rain gear, a keffiyeh over his face, carrying a suppressed rifle she recognized the silhouette of as an Orsis T-5000, Russian manufacture, long action, the platform of choice for operators who learn their trade in the Eastern European PMC world. He stood in the open for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to be seen, not long enough to be targeted. Then he moved north. Fast, not running, controlled movement, the kind that covered ground without creating visible urgency. Experienced movement, the movement of a man who'd been doing this long enough that it had stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like breathing. He didn't look at her position. He didn't need to. He knew she was there. He just blew the jamming installation, she thought, from the inside, which means he was inside the network, not protecting it, dismantling it, the whole time. Her radio burst open with Donovan's voice, urgent and immediate. "Carter, talk to me." "I'm up," she said. "Overwatch, I have the picture now. All of it." She watched the figure disappear north into the rain, into the gray maze of water and rooftops and flooded palm groves. The rival operator, he's not the enemy. A pause that felt, for the first time, like relief. "No," Donovan said quietly, "he's not." "You knew." "I suspected. I couldn't confirm until he moved." Another pause. "Sarah, listen. The hardware is still moving, and now that the jamming is down, the people running this operation are going to know the relay station is compromised. They'll accelerate the timeline." "How long?" 6 hours, maybe less. His voice was steady, the leveling out tone. "The guidance system has to be stopped before it reaches the staging coordinates. And the only people positioned to stop it right now are you and a Russian contractor who just blew his own cover to give you communication." She looked north into the rain. "Where's the staging site?" she asked. Donovan gave her the coordinates. She looked at her map, looked at the distance, looked at the water and the storm and the math of what she was being asked to do. "What's the shot geometry on the relay tower?" she asked. "I'll get you numbers, Carter." "I know." She was already moving. 6 hours. The storm hit the Zagros at 0410. It came from the north without warning. Not the gradual buildup of a weather system moving through, but the sudden, total arrival of a front that had been stacking pressure against the high peaks for days and finally broke through. The temperature dropped another 8 degrees in under 10 minutes. The wind went from 12 knots to 35 in a single gust that hit Carter like a physical blow while she was moving back along the ridgeline toward her extraction point. She pressed herself into the cliff face and waited for the first gust to pass. It didn't pass. It changed direction. That was the nature of mountain storms in the Zagros. They didn't blow through, they circled, the high terrain deflecting and redirecting the pressure front into something chaotic and unpredictable. Wind from the north one moment, northeast the next, then west, then north again. Snow mixed with the ice crystals she'd been enduring for hours. Real snow now, horizontal and dense, reducing visibility to 30 meters. "Mercer," she said, "storms come in hard. Northwest, 35 knots minimum. What does this do to my extraction window?" A pause. She could hear the wind on his end too. Even at his position 12 kilometers away, the front was rolling through. "Extraction asset is holding south of the storm line," he said. "They can't operate in this visibility. We're looking at a minimum 90-minute delay, possibly more depending on how fast the front moves." 90 minutes. She checked her status. Left arm functional, but stiff. the fragment wounds sealing under their dressings. Core temperature manageable with movement. Ammunition, 2 magazines plus the one chambered. Sidearm full. The breech kit was empty. She could sustain 90 minutes, longer if she had to. "What's the patrol status?" she asked. "Lost them on satellite when the cloud cover moved in. Last known position was 800 meters south of your extraction point. Still searching your old ridgeline positions. They haven't found my current location. Not as of the last imagery, but Carter, the power loss at the facility is going to accelerate their search tempo. They'll know something happened. They'll be looking harder." She thought about the dark compound below, the workers waking up to blackness, the facility managers running diagnostics that would tell them nothing good. Someone down there was going to start asking questions, and the questions would eventually point toward the ridgeline. "How long before the facility reports the tower shutdown to Iranian command?" she asked. "Unknown. Depends on their communication protocols. Could be 20 minutes. Could be 2 hours if they're trying to diagnose the problem internally first." She pressed deeper into the cliff face. The snow was accumulating on her shoulders now, on the barrel of her rifle, on every horizontal surface. Her thermal layer was doing its job, but the storm was systematic. It found every gap, every opening, and pushed cold into it. She thought about Falcon. He was somewhere on his mountain in this same storm. Moving toward his transmission point, probably. Or already there, his intelligence upload running through an encrypted channel to Tehran, the corporate structure of Meridian Resource Partners appearing on someone's screen in a government building. Different side of the mountain, same storm. She found she wasn't angry about what he was going to do with his information. The mine was operating on Iranian soil without Iranian government authorization. Whatever political and diplomatic complications followed from Tehran finding out, those complications were not her problem to manage. They were the consequence of a corporate decision made in a boardroom far from these mountains by people who had decided that $800 million per year was worth whatever arrangements they needed to make. Let Tehran find out. Let the consequences follow. Her problem was the extraction window and the patrol and the 90 minutes of storm between her and a helicopter. She started moving north again, toward the extraction point. The towers malfunctioned at 0440. She heard them before she understood what she was hearing. A mechanical sound she hadn't heard from them before. A grinding, stuttering rotation of the autocannon mounts. She stopped and looked south toward the pass. Tower 2's autocannon was traversing in a continuous circle. Not a targeting movement, an error state, the motor system running its calibration protocol without a computer system to tell it to stop. Tower 3's radar array was spinning at twice its normal speed, then stopping, then spinning again. The power cut had done more than shut the towers down. It had corrupted the backup battery systems that the individual units used to maintain their operational state between the primary power cycles. When the main power died, the towers had switched to backup, and something in the transition had damaged the firmware. The towers were coming back up, randomly, incorrectly. Tower 1's autocannon elevated to maximum angle and fired a 3-round burst into the sky. The shots echoed through the canyon walls like something enormous breaking. In the storm, in the dark, the sound was disorienting. It came from everywhere simultaneously, the echoes stacking on each other until the original source was impossible to identify. Then Tower 4 opened up. Not at the sky, at the valley floor. She watched through her scope, the autocannon traversing at the facility compound's direction, firing in short bursts at nothing, at the ground, at the concrete perimeter of the facility itself. Random, catastrophically random. The crew quarters building was 200 meters from Tower 4's current firing line. The firing line was moving. Mercer. Her voice was controlled and flat. The towers are back up. Corrupted firmware. They're firing randomly. Tower 4 is traversing toward the crew quarters. She heard him move. A sharp, pained sound. then the sound of equipment. I see it. Carter, they're going to hit that building in... I know. She was already doing the geometry. Tower 4 was 460 meters from her current position. The autocannon was traversing at approximately 4 degrees per second. The crew quarters building was at the tower's current bearing, plus roughly 35 degrees. At 4 degrees per second, the firing line would reach that building in under 9 seconds. She had one option: the radar housing. Mercer had told her the radar array housing on each tower was less armored than the main body. A precision shot into the radar mount could sever the power connection to the autocannon traverse motor. Not destroy the tower, but interrupt the power loop long enough for the motor to seize. It was a shot she'd never practiced, on a target she'd never trained for. In 35-knot wind, in a snowstorm, she was already prone. The M2010 was already at her shoulder. The wind was impossible. She had no data for this. Every calculation she'd built during the night had been based on the northeast dominant flow, the 6-minute cross-current cycle, the known pressure patterns of this specific valley. All of that was gone. The storm had replaced it with something chaotic and unreadable. Gusts from 3 directions in sequence, pressure drops that changed her bullet's trajectory at intervals she couldn't predict or time. 46 meters per second. That was the bullet's velocity at this range. At 460 meters, flight time was under half a second. In half a second, the wind could move. She looked at the radar housing through her scope. The mount was on top of the tower's main body, a cylindrical housing approximately 18 inches in diameter, connected to the autocannon's power system by a conduit running down the tower's exterior. The conduit junction, where the power feed entered the autocannon mount, was her target. Not the housing itself, the junction. A target approximately 4 inches across. At 460 meters, in a storm. She exhaled halfway, found the pause. The half-second of stillness in the middle of chaos. The crosshairs moved with the wind. She let them move, tracked the movement, found the pattern in the chaos. There was always a pattern, even in a storm, even when the pattern was broken and irregular and nothing like the clean cycle she'd spent the night reading. There was a lull, brief, 2 seconds, maybe less. She pressed the trigger. The shot went. She watched through the scope. The conduit junction disappeared in a spray of sparks and metal. The autocannon traverse motor made one final, lurching attempt at rotation and stopped. Tower 4's firing line was locked, frozen in place. The 3-round burst it fired as the motor seized went into the cliff face 60 meters south of the crew quarters. The building was intact. She exhaled fully. "Hit," she said. "Tower 4 is neutralized." "Carter," Mercer's voice. "That was..." "Tell me later," she said. "What are towers 1, 2, and 3 doing?" A pause while he checked. Tower 1 fired into the sky twice more and appears to have exhausted its autocannon belt. It's cycling on empty. Tower 2 is in the same traversal loop. Tower 3 went dark. Backup battery may have failed completely. So Tower 4 was the only active threat. Tower 4 was the only active threat, he confirmed. She pressed her forehead against the stock of her rifle and stayed there for 3 seconds. Then she got up. The Iranian ground patrol found her at 0502. Not her exact position. They found her general ridgeline, coming up from the south along the cliff face route she'd used earlier. She heard them 60 seconds before they came into view. 4 men moving faster than they'd been moving before. Their search pattern tightened and directed, which meant they had updated intelligence. Thermal imaging from a drone overhead, probably. Her shot at Tower 4 had given her position away. She was already moving when the first member of the patrol crested the ridgeline. North, away from them, toward the extraction point. The storm worked for her and against her simultaneously. The snow and wind reduced their visibility, but it reduced hers, too. The noise of the storm covered her movement, but it covered theirs. She navigated by terrain memory and the compass on her wrist, moving through a mountain she'd studied for 72 hours and now knew in the dark. The patrol called out behind her, "Farsi." She didn't need a translation. The tone was universal. "Stop. Stop now." She didn't stop. A shot came high and wide, the round vanishing into the storm somewhere to her right. Warning shot or a miss in the poor visibility? She didn't wait to find out which. The extraction point was 400 meters ahead. She ran. Not a sprint, a controlled, sustainable pace. The kind of running you could maintain over broken terrain in the dark without breaking an ankle or leaving your footing. She'd been taught this pace on a mountain in Colorado 4 years ago by an instructor who had run her up a 14,000-foot peak in a thunderstorm and told her that speed wasn't the variable. Direction is the variable, he'd said. Know where you're going. Move toward it. Don't stop. She knew where she was going. Behind her, the patrol was gaining. Fit, motivated men on familiar terrain, uninjured, running in numbers. She could hear them, closer than before, the sound carrying through the storm in fragments. The extraction LZ was a flat section of ridgeline she'd identified on the maps and confirmed visually during her survey. Large enough for a helicopter under normal conditions. Marginal under storm conditions. The extraction asset had said 90 minutes. She didn't know how long she'd been running. She reached the LZ at 05:19. No helicopter. She went to ground immediately, prone, facing south toward the patrol's approach. Her breathing was elevated. She brought it down deliberately. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the way Mercer had taught her. You can't shoot at the top of a breath. You can't shoot in a panic. You can shoot in a heartbeat if the heartbeat is controlled. The patrol crested the ridgeline 200 meters south of her. They spread out, 4 men in a line, moving slowly now, searching. She had 2 magazines. She had the darkness and the storm and the cold. She had a flat rock to her left and a broken boulder to her right, and between them a position that was not good cover, but was the best available cover on this piece of ground. She waited. Mercer's voice came through the radio at 05:23. Extraction is inbound. 8 minutes. They found a window in the storm front. There's a corridor of reduced wind speed moving through your area. It won't last. 8 minutes. I have the patrol 200 meters south, she said quietly. 4 personnel. They're searching. A pause. Can you hold 8 minutes? She looked at the 4 heat signatures in her thermal scope. Moving carefully. Professional soldiers doing a night search in a storm. They were good, but the conditions were working against them as much as against her. Visibility was down to 20 meters. She was prone and cold, and her thermal signature was suppressed by the rock face behind her. Yes, she said. She didn't know if that was true. It was the only available answer. The patrol moved north along the ridgeline, slow, methodical. 2 men on the cliff face side, 2 on the open ridgeline. They were going to sweep through her position if they continued their current heading. She had a decision to make. Engage and compromise her position completely, or stay silent and hope the storm and the darkness kept her invisible for 8 more minutes. She stayed still. The nearest patrol member passed 15 meters to her left, moving slowly, weapon up, head down against the driving snow. Close enough that Carter could hear him breathing, labored, the breathing of a man who had been climbing in the cold for 2 hours. He was looking at the ground in front of his feet as much as at the terrain around him. He walked past. She didn't breathe. The second patrol member passed 20 meters to her right, then the third, further south. The fourth had stopped near the cliff face, checking a rock formation. 3 of 4 passed her position, the fourth still there. She watched him on her thermal scope. He was standing very still, his weapon at a low ready, looking at something on the cliff face near him. A disturbed patch of rock, maybe, the marks of someone who had been pressed against that surface earlier tonight. He was looking directly at the path she'd used. He didn't look up to where she was lying. She held absolutely still for 3 minutes. Then he moved on. She exhaled into the rock. "Mercer," she whispered. "Patrol past my position." 5 minutes? 4, he said. "Carter, I can hear the rotors on my end. They're close." She heard the helicopter before she saw it. A deep, rhythmic beat cutting through the storm. Different from the UAV whine, different from the wind. The unmistakable sound of a military helicopter working hard against high-altitude crosswinds. It came from the north, following the ridgeline, descending toward the flat section of the LZ. The patrol heard it too. She saw them react on her thermal scope, 4 signatures stopping, orienting toward the sound. The professional reflex of soldiers who had been searching for something and had just heard something that might tell them where it was. She was already moving to the LZ, running low, using the final meters of cover before the flat section opened up. The helicopter was descending fast, the pilot taking advantage of the wind corridor, not wasting the window. Its running lights were off, a dark shape in a dark storm, visible only as a thermal mass in her scope. The patrol was moving toward the sound. She reached the LZ edge and looked back. 150 meters. The patrol was covering it fast. They'd resolved their course now, moving directly toward the helicopter. She had her rifle up. Not to fire, to be ready to fire. The helicopter touched down, a hard, quick contact, rotors still turning, the crew chief's door already open. She sprinted the final 30 meters, head down against the rotor wash, snow and grit blasting her face. A shot from the patrol, high and wide, then 2 more. She reached the door. The crew chief grabbed her arm and pulled. She was inside. The helicopter was already lifting before she had her feet fully clear of the ground. A violent, banking climb away from the ridgeline, the pilot pushing the airframe hard into the storm to gain altitude and distance simultaneously. She pressed her back against the crew compartment wall and looked out the open door. The ridgeline was already gone in the snow. Somewhere down there, 4 patrol members were standing on a flat section of mountain, watching an empty sky. Somewhere on the other ridge, a man who had once tried to warn her and twice declined to kill her was climbing toward his transmission point with documentation of a crime that $800 million a year hadn't been enough to hide forever. She found out what happened to Mercer before the helicopter reached the FARP. The crew chief, a sergeant named Holloway, compact and businesslike, with the flat effect of someone who had done too many of these extractions to find them remarkable, handed her a medical kit without comment, and then, while she was taping her arm, told her that a second extraction asset had reached the forward support position 20 minutes ago. "The advisor," Holloway said, "older guy, he's stable. They're taking him to the surgical team at Al-Taqaddum." She sat with that for a moment. Stable. "He was talking when they loaded him," Holloway added. "Asking about you. I told him we had a confirmed pickup." "What did he say?" Holloway almost smiled. "He said, of course she made it. Then he asked if anyone had coffee." She looked out the window at the storm. The Zagros was gone now, lost in cloud and snow, indistinguishable from the rest of the dark terrain below. A mountain range like any other from up here. No sign of what was inside it. The mine, the dead towers, the wreckage on the valley floor, the workers sleeping in their crew quarters, unaware of how close the math had been. Holloway moved back to his station. She was alone with the engine noise and the turbulence and the gray outside the window. She thought about the mission brief. Disable Iranian autonomous weapon towers protecting a covert supply route. She had done that. Technically, she had done exactly that. She had also done several other things that were not in the mission brief. She thought about what would happen to those things. The intelligence Mercer had transmitted, the Meridian ownership chain, the satellite imagery, the corporate documentation. It existed now. It was on a server somewhere, in a file, attached to a report. It could be buried. These things could always be buried if the people doing the burying were motivated enough and had the right access. Or it could find its way out. She thought about Falcon, somewhere in the storm, uploading his version of the same information to Tehran. Two separate intelligence packages, assembled independently, pointing at the same corporate entity from opposite directions. That was harder to bury. That was two fires instead of one, burning from both sides of the mountain. She didn't know what would happen. She had no illusions about outcomes. She'd been doing this long enough to know that the right outcome and the actual outcome were different things, and the distance between them was sometimes enormous. Meridian might weather it. The political complications might be managed. The $800 million per year had a way of making complications manageable. But they'd know. The people at Meridian would know that someone had found the thread, would know their structure had been documented and transmitted, would know that the operation was visible in ways it hadn't been before. Sometimes that was enough to change behavior. Sometimes it wasn't. She'd done what she could do. Mercer had done what he could do. And a man whose name she didn't know, on the opposite ridge, had done what he could do. It was the most any of them could do, and it would have to be enough. The after-action report was filed 48 hours later. Carter sat in a prefab conference room at Al-Taqadum Air Base, across a table from two officers she'd never met, and a man in civilian clothes whose specific role was not introduced. The officers were professional and thorough. The man in civilian clothes asked most of the questions. The report covered the relay destruction, the tower network status at the conclusion of the operation, the Iranian ground patrol contact, the extraction. It covered Mercer's injury and the drone strike on the support position. It did not cover the intelligence package Mercer had assembled and transmitted. It did not cover the junction box. It did not cover a chain-link fence in a dark compound and a brass casing placed upright in the dirt. She answered every question asked. She did not volunteer anything that wasn't asked. When the debrief was over, the civilian man held the door for her and said, in a conversational tone that was too careful to be casual, "Good outcome on this one, Sergeant Carter. Clean." She looked at him for a moment. "Yes, sir," she said. She walked out. Mercer was in the surgical ward 2 buildings over. His right arm was in a complicated external fixator. The blast had broken the radius in 2 places and caused enough soft tissue damage that the surgeons were talking about a second procedure. He was sitting up in the hospital bed when she came in, looking irritated in the specific way of a man who has been told he needs to rest and has no intention of resting. He looked better than she'd expected. He looked about 100 years old. "Carter," he said. "Mercer." She sat in the chair beside the bed. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The ward was quiet, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the distant sound of aircraft on the flight line, the ordinary sounds of a military medical facility going about its work. "The debrief," he said. "Clean," she said. He nodded slowly. Not surprised, not relieved exactly. The nod of a man who had anticipated this and was simply confirming it. "The package I transmitted," he said. "I assume it went where you sent it?" "It went where I sent it," he confirmed. "It'll take time. These things take time. But it's in the right hands." She didn't ask whose hands. She didn't need to know, and he probably wouldn't tell her. And the not knowing was a form of protection for both of them. "You knew," she said. "Going in. You suspected at least." "I suspected," he said. "I had pieces of it. Not enough to refuse the mission. I didn't have the certainty to refuse. But enough to know I needed to be watching." "You could have told me." "I told you what I had when I had enough to tell you," he said. "Carter, I've sent people into things I didn't fully understand for 40 years. The only way I've been able to live with that is by making sure that when I learn something, I act on it." He looked at his arm in the fixator. "Even when acting on it is expensive." She thought about what that meant, the career implications, The security clearance review that was certainly coming. The questions that would follow, how he had accessed certain databases, what channels he had used for the transmissions, who he had spoken to. "You're going to have a difficult few months," she said. "I've had difficult months before," he said. "I'm still here." She looked at the fixator, at the arm that hadn't worked correctly last night when she was pressing herself against a cliff face in a snowstorm. "For the record," she said quietly, "thank you." He waved it off. "Don't thank me. I almost got you killed in a mountain pass protecting a corporate mineral extraction operation. That's not a story I'm proud of." "You also made sure I had the information I needed to make the right call," she said, "whatever it cost." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a helicopter passed over, its rotors fading south. "The workers," he said, "the mining crew." "Safe," she said, "in their quarters when the towers went down. None of them knew how close it was." He nodded, exhaled slowly. The specific exhale of a man releasing something he's been carrying. "Good," he said. "That's the thing, Carter. That's the thing that matters." 3 days later, she stood on the flight line at Al Taqaddum, waiting for transport north. The sky was clear, the kind of hard, cold clarity that follows a major storm front, where the air has been scoured of everything soft and the light is almost painfully direct. She could see for 50 kilometers, the flat plain of central Iraq extending in every direction, brown and vast and indifferent. She had a message on her secure device, not from command, from Mercer, who had apparently convinced someone to let him use a terminal from his hospital bed. It was short. "Meridian press conference scheduled next week." Somebody talked. "Not us," someone inside. "Looks like 2 fires are harder to manage than 1. Stay clean, stay careful, M." She read it twice. Then she looked east, toward the direction of the Zagros. The mountains were below the horizon from here. Too far, too low. She couldn't see them. She thought about the pass, the valley, the 3 burned-out vehicles on the road. She thought about a man on an opposing ridgeline, patient and deliberate, who had placed a brass casing on a rock like a letter and trusted her to understand what it meant, who had stood in the shadow of a drilling rig and watched her set a charge and said nothing, who had climbed back into his mountain and done his part of the work from the other side. She would never know his name. She would never see him again, almost certainly. They would return to their separate wars, their separate countries, their separate versions of the story, in which the other was the adversary, officially, always. But in one mountain pass on one night, they had worked toward the same thing, had read the same situation and reached the same conclusion, and acted on it with the same tools, from opposite ridgelines. That didn't make them allies. It made them something harder to name. The transport aircraft rolled up to the flight line. She picked up her kit and walked toward it. She didn't look east again. She knew what was there.